Last week, the polls finally closed. Thousands and thousands of people in the Lakes area and across the great state of Minnesota went and cast their midterm ballots. So we're finally done with all the political advertising and everything like that. And it is a very interesting election. Here in the state of Minnesota, we saw a reversal from 4 years ago, a blast to the past, you might say. The Minnesota House of Representatives gained 11 seats to actually flip from Democrat to Republican, which means for at least the next 2 years, Governor Mark Dayton will have to deal with a Republican House, something he didn't have to deal with during the first 2 years in office. In fact, his first 2 years in office, he had to deal with the Republican House and Senate. A lot of gridlock, a lot of arguments. Then the House and Senate flipped Democrat. Now, a few years later, the Republicans are back in party here in the state of Minnesota. Hopefully it won't mean gridlock, but it'll be interesting come January and February when the Minnesota legislative session starts, how things will roll out. Budget will be the number one thing on the priority list for the legislature when they meet. And of course, the U.S. Senate going Republican as well. Could be up to 54 seats by the time the runoffs are started. In fact, most political analysts believe it'll be 54 to 46 by the time the dust completely settles on these runoff elections in states like Georgia and Louisiana finish up here in the next couple of months. But one thing about this election cycle that I wanted to talk about is something that I hadn't really noticed much until this year. It's been progressively getting worse, but that is the first thing I hinted to, advertising. The amount of money that's being spent on political ads and where it's coming from. In North Carolina's U.S. Senate race, this is for a United States Senator, over $100 million was spent on that race, making it the most expensive Senate race ever. Now, here in the great state of Minnesota, we had two very hotly contested congressional races, both right here in northern Minnesota. Congressional District 7, Congressional District 8. District 7 featured Colin Peterson versus Tori Westrom. District 8 was Stuart Mills versus Rick Nolan. District 7 pretty much includes all of our viewing area. District 8 would be if we have any of our viewers over there in Wadena or Hubbard County, or if you have friends or family there. That's how close District 8 comes to our overall area here. Both those congressional races combined had over $21 million spent. Most of this money is coming from outside the state of Minnesota. There was a Supreme Court ruling about, I want to say 8, maybe 12 years ago now, that basically was the Citizens United case, it's been called. It basically said that there can be no campaign contribution limits from outside groups to super PACs or other types of organizations. The idea was that by limiting such funding, you are in fact limiting the First Amendment freedom of speech. This has now gone on, and we are seeing huge amounts of money spent. And I can't just help but think, $21 million spent in a pair of congressional races. They spent $90 million in St. Paul last year, approved on an office building. They spent barely $70 or $80 million on highway repair recovery for the whole year. So if you're spending $100 million in a U.S. Senate race in North Carolina, $21 million on congressional races here, for positions in government that pay six-figure salaries, there's something messed up about that when you spend that much money in order to get a job that really pays that little in comparison. It's troubled me, actually, for the first time. Maybe we do have too much money going on right now in politics. I just can't justify spending $1 billion, as they're saying will be the minimum spent for the next presidential election, when I can think of how many schools, roads, bridges, and how many good programs and things can be done across the country. Imagine if that money had been donated to something like the United Way instead of political campaigns. I'm beginning to be troubled by the amount of money that's spent in these things, because I'm wondering, what are we actually getting for it as citizens?